hobbyists, and welcome to another episode of Sork's Mekshop. Today I'm going to cover a technique for true metal metallics that I've been tinkering with and refining over the course of painting my Grey Knights army. I've learned a few things along the way, and I hope that they'll help you get the most out of your metallics as well. For those of you new to the hobby, what do I mean by true metal metallics? Well, quite simply, I just mean painting the parts of the miniature that are supposed to look like metal with metallic paint. This is opposed to non-metal metallic, where you try to make regular pigmented paint look like metal. But Sork, you say, I thought the point of using metallic paints is so that I can make it look metallic with no extra work. Well, sure, that is certainly an option. But what I found when doing metallics that way is that I ended up with models that just didn't look realistically like metal in a lot of cases. And that really comes down to the scale, and it comes down to how the paints work. So it took a little bit of research and a lot of experimentation, but I learned a few things that I'll be covering in this video. So stay tuned. Okay, starting from a black primed miniature, we're going to take some phthalo blue and put it in our airbrush. This is going to become an undercoat, primarily from the bottom up. It's going to be sort of the deepest recessed shadow is what we're going for here. And the reason we do this is going to be apparent later, but essentially when manufacturers make metallic paints, they make them with aluminum or mica or ground up pearl flakes. Those flakes are generally bigger in terms of the size than pigments are. Here I'm moving up to a cerulean blue, same kind of thing, or same kind of idea. Going for the high parts to make it lighter. And then after that, I'm going to use gloss varnish over the whole thing. I'll explain that as I go. In any case, the larger flakes inside the medium means that, sort of like if you can imagine a jar full of sand versus the same jar full of gravel, right? You're going to get more light shining through the gravel-filled jar than you will through the sand-filled jar, right? Same kind of idea. With a metallic paint, you're actually going to get more, it's going to be more transparent than most pigmented paints. Even though you can't tell right away because the little flakes are kind of shiny, and so they reflect, and that makes it harder to notice that it's actually somewhat transparent. So by providing this undercoat of color, you're actually going to tint the metallic paint that goes over it very subtly. The way it's going to manifest is that it's going to manifest in a way where, depending on the angle you look at the model in, you'll actually see the color just kind of on the edge of the sight. So basically wherever the light hits, it's going to look really silver, and wherever the light doesn't hit, it's going to look like it's got a little bit of a blue hue. The gloss varnish that I put on is a similar reason. When those flakes hit a flat or satin primer or other paint underneath it, they lay down at all different angles, right? And so this is why sometimes you'll notice that your metallics look a little rough maybe. They'll lay down at all different angles, which means that when the light hits them, they reflect in different ways, which makes that actually look a little bit more rough. And so putting a gloss varnish down means that you're getting a much smoother surface for those flakes to hit, and so they'll lay flat and it makes them shinier. So I skipped, as I was talking about that, explaining that, I skipped a few steps here. Basically, after my undercoats, after the varnish, I then sprayed with Vallejo metal color duralumin. It's one of my favorite metal colors. It's a nice general all-purpose one. It's not the shiniest, but it's one of the nice general all-purpose ones. And then what I'm doing here is I'm using Nazareth yellow contrast paint, and I'm using that over the silver, and that will then tint those parts gold. It's a really easy and fast way to do a really consistent gold color without having to buy a separate color of metallic paint. You could also take an ink or contrast paint and mix it together with your duralumin to kind of pre-tint it, if you will. But I like this technique better just because it allows me to be more decisive later in the game, I guess, as to what I want to have gold and what I don't. And it also saves me a step, I guess, because I don't have to mix anything together. I just kind of take it out of the pot and put it in my little palette and start getting to work on where I want to put it on the model. So I just kind of go around the model with that. It gets a really nice gold right out of the gate, but obviously we're still going to come back and provide a little bit of shade and things like that to make it provide more shadows and that sort of thing. Here, we're just going through the rest of the model. I'm using some regular paints from Army Painter for the most part. This is pale sand for the bones. And then as we work our way around, I'll use a variety of other colors, which I've forgotten off the top of my head, to make other spots, you know, the various reds and browns and so forth that we need for it. I want to say that's, you know, it's pale sand. The red, I want to say, is resplendent red. And then I used just a mix of Payne's gray with the pale sand to create the gray, to create the whites actually, but it was to create the gray that I then highlighted with whites later on to make it actually white. Because as you should remember from previous videos, you never want to go straight to white. You want to start off with another color and work your way up. This is just Black Templar contrast for like hoses and whatnot. And I'm sorry, Naphthol Crimson apparently is the one I was using, not the Resplendent Red, or maybe I used a little bit of both and mixed them together. In any case, this is for more of the highlighting of the red, I guess. So, as I was saying, when it comes to whites, a lot of people have trouble with whites, and the reason they have trouble with whites is because they go to a pure white too fast, in my opinion. So the way you solve that is you start off with either a gray or a light brown color, depending on if you want your white to be a cold white or if you want it to be a warm white. And then you just highlight up from there. And the only time you want to get to pure white is on the very final highlights. And that really helps you prevent the white from looking too chalky. And once again, just kind of working my way around the model with the flat paints, if you will, the standard paints, not the metallics. Here I'm doing kind of a highlight color for the flesh. Once again, I really like using, I think I've told, well, for those of you who watch my previous videos, you'll know that I really like using burnt sienna as my base flesh tone for honestly most human skin, because you can take it and push it darker for the darker tones, you can leave it more in the middle for the mid-brown tones, and you can add more whites if you want to make it more of a Caucasian kind of tone. So it's really a good kind of central point to work, either darker or lighter, depending on what kind of a human skin tone you want to have. And then, you know, from there, just kind of, again, keep working around, working the highlights and whatnot. The other thing you want to remember, and this is kind of getting back to the metallic piece, is that the metallics work a little bit different in real life in terms of how they interact with light than flat tones do. Because they're reflective, they're going to catch reflections, and they're going to catch bounce lighting from, you know, the ground or from other things that are maybe less reflective than them. And so that's part of the reason why you want to have that undertone that I mentioned before. You also want to provide a little bit more intentional shadows and intentional highlights in places that maybe would catch reflections from other parts on the model that are metal. And then this part here that I'm doing is taking some oil paints. We've covered oils in previous videos, but for those of you who didn't watch those, this is a little bit of a Mars Black oil and ultramarine blue oil. I'm adding some mineral spirits to them to create a fairly thin wash. What we're going to do is panel line here, which means that we're just taking a very thin mixture, wash level mixture of those two oil paints. And then we're going to take a liner brush and we're just going to touch it to each of the seams between panels in the armor. We're going to touch it along pretty much any place where any two things meet, pretty much, that are especially in the metals. And what that'll do is just help really crisp up the definition between each of those joins to help provide a little bit more distinction between where the two parts meet. I added the blue because that'll also help emphasize that under layer that we did as well. So it took me a little bit to get the right consistency in this particular case. Sometimes it's not really a science the way I do it. I just kind of squeeze the paint out and then mix it until it's the right consistency and it flows correctly. I've also noticed that depending on how long I'm taking with the work, sometimes I'll have to add more mineral spirits later because it evaporates relatively quickly. But as you can see here, I'm literally just sort of touching the tip of the brush to each spot. And the reason I can do that is because once the oil paints are thinned with the mineral spirits, they really have a very low surface tension. and so they'll just flow along the seams of whatever you've touched them to. So you just touch them to the lowest part of a join between two parts, and it'll just flow along it until it runs out of liquid to do with. And so then you just dip a little more and continue the process, working all the way around the model, and like I said, getting that extra definition in there. And it's pretty hard to overdo it. It's also pretty hard to make a mistake, because you'll see in the next step that any mistakes we made, we can clean up. The basic way to clean up is just wiping the highest surfaces with a makeup sponge, which wipes off and removes the oil paints that have overflown the creases that you put them in. That's the easiest way to do it, and the most common way to do it. If you find you have a stubborn spot that doesn't want to come up just because it's sat too long and so the mineral spirits have evaporated too much, then you can just take some pure mineral spirits with your brush and reapply them. It'll reactivate the oil, and then you can wipe it off again. It's what we call a reductive process, painting oils, because you can remove the oil in order to get different effects with the paint job. And so here I am going through with the sponge, just sort of cleaning everything up real quick, getting the parts that I overflowed paint off of, and making sure I don't stain stuff that I don't want to have stained with the oil colors. And that's pretty much it. I didn't cover the base, but I'll do that another time. And here's the finished product. So you can see in the parts of his legs there where he's got the panel lining, and if you notice that as he turns, there's slightly different colors in the shadows as he goes, and the highlights hit different spots as he goes as well. And you can, subtle, but you can make out a little bit of that blue as well. At least I hope you can, and I hope you enjoy the technique. Last thing I'll mention, the lines on the books and the scrolls and whatnot I just did with a very fine tip felt pen. I think it was like .005. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. Whether you decide to follow my technique precisely or not, remember that the key to making your true metals look realistic is to think of them as being in their environment at scale. And so, you'll want to find ways to provide those shadows, reflections, and highlights that help emphasize that. Until next time, keep on looting.